exploring Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis Trilogy, a deep dive. Welcome to what I believe is the 21st or 22nd installment of our series exploring the realms of speculative fiction. As we wrap up the year on a strong note, we will delve into the works of Octavia Butler, specifically her trilogy formerly known as Xenogenesis, which is now referred to as the Lilith's Brood trilogy. Our discussion will primarily focus on this trilogy. By now, many of you are seasoned participants in these discussions, so we will start with a brief overview of Butler's biography and some introductory comments before diving into the intricate world-building present in her work. The narrative she creates is not only rich but also profoundly alien, offering a unique perspective that challenges our understanding of reality. Following that, we will explore some philosophical themes that I have identified throughout the trilogy. Of course, I encourage you to share any thoughts or insights you may have encountered while reading. I came across some fascinating quotes from Butler, taken from various interviews and an essay, which I believe will enhance our conversation. To kick things off, I want to share a quote from an interview she did with Writers and Books. When asked about her identity as a writer, particularly whether she considers herself a science fiction author, she responded, "I consider myself a writer." As you might know, it can be incredibly tedious to have people constantly asking you to categorize your work as speculative fiction or science fiction. What truly matters is whether it is a good story. If it is, then that's what counts. She then reflected on her background, noting that her mother had little awareness of science fiction or any specific literary genre, having only completed 3 years of formal education. Her mother was taken out of school early to work, especially after her grandmother became widowed around the onset of the Great Depression. This situation meant that many of her older siblings, who were already struggling financially, did not receive an education. Butler's mother was pleased to see her daughter engrossed in books, believing that if Butler was reading indoors, she was less likely to get into trouble and might have a better chance at survival. Butler's perspective on reading and writing was shaped by her family's circumstances. She mentioned that while reading was generally accepted, writing was viewed with skepticism. Her family was concerned when she expressed the ambition to make a living as a writer, a challenging goal indeed. It's intriguing to note how many science fiction authors begin their writing journeys at a young age. For instance, during a program with Greg Barrett, he shared that he started writing at the age of 8, while Butler herself began at 10. She acknowledged that we are all influenced by the stories we encounter and grow to love, and she recalled collecting her first rejection slip at the age of 13, a pursuit she continued for quite some time. This leads us nicely into a discussion about her biography. Like many writers we have examined, Butler faced periods of struggle where she found it difficult to sell her work. She had to navigate the emotional challenges of rejection without allowing it to deter her from her passion for writing. To begin our exploration of her life, let's note that she was born in Pasadena. Her parents married, but her father passed away when she was quite young, leaving him absent from her life. Octavia Butler and her mother relocated to live with her mother's family, who were deeply religious. Growing up in Pasadena, she experienced a somewhat less segregated environment compared to many other cities at the time, though racial tensions were still very much present. As an African-American family, Butler and her relatives were acutely aware of these dynamics, especially during an era preceding major civil rights legislation. She often accompanied her mother, who worked as a maid, and witnessed firsthand how racial and social hierarchies operated in everyday life. From an early age, Butler displayed a passion for storytelling. At just 10 years old, she persuaded her mother to buy her a typewriter, and she began writing stories, though not science fiction at first. Instead, she crafted what she called horses' tales, a genre popular among young girls at the time. While little is known about these early works, they reflect the creative spark that would later define her career. A pivotal moment came when Butler watched a low-budget sci-fi film titled A Devil Girl from Mars, released about 5 years earlier. In interviews, she admitted it was a poorly made movie, likely one of the campy, sensationalist productions common in that era. Yet, rather than dismissing it, she had a revelation: I could do better than that. This marked the beginning of her journey into science fiction writing, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become her iconic Patternist series. Like many renowned authors, Butler started writing early without overthinking perfection. She experimented freely, learning through trial and error, Her childhood wasn't easy. She was tall for her age, faced bullying from peers, and often retreated indoors. Despite these challenges, she persevered, graduating from high school and later earning an associate degree in history from Pasadena City College. She then attended California State College in Los Angeles before shifting her focus to writing courses at UCLA. All the while, she supported herself with various odd jobs, squeezing in writing sessions during late-night hours. Butler's dedication paid off in a big way. She achieved remarkable success, becoming the first science fiction writer to receive a MacArthur Fellowship, often dubbed the Genius Grant. At the time, the award amounted to around $220,000, a significant sum that underscored the groundbreaking nature of her work. Her story is a testament to resilience, creativity, and the power of believing in one's potential, even in the face of adversity. Her earnings have been increasing significantly, and that truly made a difference for her. At one stage, for her novel Kindred after she had already released several other novels, she received a $5,000 advance. That would have been in the mid-1970s, and that amount of money went a long way back then. She mentioned this in a few interviews. Now, you might wonder why the Xenogenesis Trilogy went out of print and was later reissued under a different title. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure about the specifics, but it's possible we might have someone here who knows. I imagine it could have been due to popular demand, though it didn't happen until after she passed away. That raises an interesting point. For instance, Clay's Ark was published posthumously, but it was technically a reissue within the trilogy. Yes, exactly, the Xenogenesis series was the name under which I first encountered it. The first trade edition came out in 2000 when she was still alive. Originally, the trilogy was published as Xenogenesis*, which featured some pretty cool cover art compared to later editions. This newer version looks rather plain by comparison. I recall how people tried to pitch her on turning Kindred into something like a romance novel after she'd already published a few legitimate novels. It seems they wanted to market it differently, maybe even transform it into a Western-style story set on alien planets. But the core lesson from this is that no matter how successful you become, there will always be people trying to convince you to change your work to fit their vision. Interesting, right? Let me jump back a little bit. One pivotal moment in her career, which she discussed in multiple interviews, was her involvement in the Open Door program run by the Writers Guild of America. This initiative aimed to support young, struggling writers, including those from minority backgrounds. It was essentially an outreach effort to bring diverse voices into the literary world. She emphasized how crucial this program was because, without it, she wouldn't have connected with people who shared similar experiences. These writing workshops became a lifeline for her creatively. Through this program, she also met Harlan Ellison, who took an active interest in her career. Harlan Ellison was known for being very assertive, some might even say aggressive, but he genuinely wanted to help. He encouraged her to attend the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop, which meant leaving California and traveling to participate in the program. There, she met Samuel Delany and many other influential figures. The workshop lasted 6 weeks and proved transformative for her. Her first novella was eventually published in an anthology that emerged from that experience. This marked the beginning of her professional breakthrough. If you look closely at her timeline, you'll notice a significant gap between 1971 and 1976 when she struggled to sell any of her work. During those years, she kept writing, submitting pieces, and facing rejection after rejection. It must have felt like hitting a wall repeatedly. But then things began to shift. Opportunities started opening up, and she gained recognition. As I mentioned earlier, she received that $5,000 advance, part of which she used to travel across the United States by Greyhound bus. This journey allowed her to see various parts of the country, broadening her perspective. By the 1980s, her talent was finally being acknowledged. When discussing the accolades of this remarkable author, it's important to note that I've only highlighted a selection of the awards she has received. She has consistently demonstrated her talent in writing and developing intricate stories. Her work often involves large-scale projects, such as her 3 novels, each of which follows a cohesive theme. Unlike some authors who tend to exhaust a single narrative universe, often to the point of diminishing returns, she knows when to conclude a story and gracefully transitions to her next endeavor. Throughout her career, she traveled extensively, using her journeys as research for her novels. For instance, her trips to the Amazon and the Andes were not just adventures, they were integral to the authenticity and depth of her storytelling. In recognition of her exceptional contributions to literature, she was awarded the prestigious MacArthur Genius Grant. In a humble reflection on this honor, she remarked that they hadn't assessed her IQ, leaving her uncertain about the label of a genius, but she appreciated the recognition nonetheless. Tragically, her life was cut short at the age of 56, likely due to a stroke that led to serious injuries. Despite her untimely passing, she had already achieved a significant amount in her career. She authored a series of novels, taught aspiring writers, and led workshops, all while overcoming periods of rejection and writer's block. Her journey illustrates her resilience and dedication to her craft. Additionally, she shared insights about her experiences in the science fiction genre, which she described as initially being dominated by a specific demographic, predominantly white adolescent males, often labeled as nerds. This narrow focus made the genre less appealing to broader audiences, including black readers, adults, and women, for many years. However, she noted that the emergence of best-selling authors helped to attract a more diverse readership to science fiction. As many science fiction writers have matured, their works have gained wider acceptance, and some continue to produce high-quality literature that draws in new fans. She emphasized that many successful science fiction writers began as avid readers of the genre themselves. This trend seems even more pronounced today, as the landscape of science fiction writing has expanded significantly. While some may enter the field with commercial intentions, the reality is that the genre is highly competitive, and the scrutiny of new works is intense. Readers are quick to critique anything that feels derivative or uninspired. Therefore, fostering a vibrant science fiction community requires strong role models and innovative storytellers to inspire the next generation of writers. When we discuss the realm of science fiction, it's important to highlight the contributions of authors who, like Michael Moorcock, consistently challenge the boundaries of the genre. One such author is the subject of our conversation, who is known for her innovative approach to storytelling. Her novels particularly exemplify this trend, as they delve into complex themes that may surprise some readers. For instance, I was joking with a friend earlier today about how the audience for her work tends to fall into two categories: those who are genuinely intrigued by her exploration of topics such as sexuality, and those who might be taken aback by her candidness. Her narratives often include interspecies relationships and raise provocative questions about the future of humanity in light of genetic mixing. This boldness in addressing such subjects is something that earlier science fiction writers might have dismissed, yet contemporary authors like Moorcock, Philip Jose Farmer, and Octavia Butler are redefining what can be included in the science fiction genre. Ursula K. Le Guin also shares this progressive spirit. In her reflections, she notes that as more black individuals begin to engage with science fiction, an increasing number will also venture into writing within the genre. This shift is already underway, as she recounts her own entry into science fiction during a time when the landscape was becoming more inclusive for women. It became acceptable to acknowledge that the universe is not solely represented by white or male characters, allowing her to create narratives featuring black women and heroines without facing significant backlash. She recalls receiving letters from readers curious about the prevalence of black characters in her work, but overall, the response was largely accepting or silent. This perspective comes from an interview with a black scholar conducted in 1986, which highlights that even then, changes were beginning to take shape. Additionally, she emphasizes that her writing is influenced not just by literature but by everything she encounters in her life. Her travels to places like the Amazon and the Andes have enriched her descriptions of environments and wildlife in her stories. Before we dive deeper into the narrative world she creates, I'd like to ask about your thoughts on her work. Considering her biography and the timeline of her career, it's interesting to note that she emerged during the 1970s and 1980s, a period when science fiction was becoming more mainstream, partly due to the rise of television series and films. Do you think this shift opened doors for authors like her, who may have felt isolated or disconnected from the broader writing community? It seems there was a growing opportunity for writers to reach out, share ideas, and engage in dialogue about their work. In reflecting on this topic, let's consider how influential media like Star Wars became a gateway for audiences who might not have otherwise engaged with science fiction. For example, during the interview mentioned, the scholar highlights how Black audiences embraced Star Wars and, inspired by its creativity, began exploring works by other authors in the genre. Prior to this, franchises like Star Trek late 1960s to early 1970s, and shorter-lived series such as Battlestar Galactica which ran for only 2 seasons, or Space, 1999 laid some groundwork, but none resonated as widely as Star Wars . Even classics like The Twilight Zone pushed boundaries with its surreal narratives, creating a cultural appetite for imaginative storytelling. These shows collectively helped science fiction escape its earlier reputation as niche, pulp entertainment, a label often dismissively applied to genre works, and invited broader audiences to take it seriously. This shift created an environment where authors like Octavia Butler could thrive. Butler, often recognized as the first African-American woman to gain prominence in science fiction, emerged during a time when the genre was gaining legitimacy. Her success was also shaped by allies like Harlan Ellison, contentious but influential figure in speculative fiction. Ellison's reputation for fiercely advocating for writers likely shielded Butler from exploitative practices in publishing, allowing her to focus on honing her craft. For context, writing speculative fiction in this era was financially precarious. Many authors balanced their creative pursuits with day jobs, as earning a stable income from writing alone was rare. Additionally, technological advancements, like the drop in long-distance call rates, facilitated collaboration and networking long before the Internet revolutionized communication. These factors, though less visible, played a role in fostering communities and opportunities for writers. Butler's trajectory, supported by cultural shifts and interpersonal alliances, might not have been possible in earlier decades, such as the 1930s, when both systemic barriers and limited access to resources stifled diverse voices in the genre. Her legacy underscores how evolving media, social dynamics, and mentorship collectively shape artistic innovation. Many of the writers who contributed to Star Trek weren't full-time professionals in the traditional sense. Instead, the show often brought in different individuals to handle specific episodes, creating a collaborative environment. Notably, the series featured a multiracial cast from its very first season, which was groundbreaking for its time. For example, a particular writer graduated from Pasadena City College in 1968, but at that point, she wasn't yet established in the industry. She hadn't attended writing workshops or gained significant recognition. This period was formative, as she balanced various jobs to support her creative pursuits. Her approach to work was practical. She viewed jobs as temporary means to an end, prioritizing income to fund her writing rather than becoming emotionally attached to any role. Sometimes, these jobs even provided research material for her stories. If she could sustain herself through writing alone, that was ideal, but she ultimately focused on novel writing. There's no evidence she spent much time contemplating a career in television, though it's possible that living in California, where the TV industry was concentrated, might have made such a path more accessible. However, she seemed to prefer taking unrelated jobs, which allowed her to observe people and situations that later inspired her novels. For instance, she often transformed real-life characters or experiences into fictional narratives. This strategy mirrors the career of someone like Michael Apted, who worked on the iconic 7 Up documentary series before transitioning to feature films like the Rocky movies. Apted faced challenges in gaining respect from the documentary community, as his shift to mainstream cinema was seen as a departure from his earlier work. Similarly, the writer in question might have felt that pursuing television writing would have diverted her focus from her true passion. Instead, she opted for diverse experiences, believing they enriched her storytelling. This approach highlights a common dilemma for creatives, balancing practicality with artistic goals. Whether through side jobs or parallel projects, many artists navigate these choices to sustain their craft while pursuing their ambitions. When we ponder our writerly ambitions, we often reflect on past jobs that were less than ideal. It's a common sentiment that making movies is a daunting endeavor due to the exorbitant costs involved. In contrast, writing is relatively more affordable, making it a more appealing option for many. Let's delve into the narrative realm. Nowadays, self-publishing offers a viable path, allowing authors to reach an audience without the traditional barriers. The narrative world is notably coherent and rich, akin to the universes crafted by other authors we've explored. In these stories, the Huancali are central figures. The narrative begins with humanity on the brink of extinction following a global thermonuclear war that devastates the Northern Hemisphere, a scenario that could realistically occur in such a conflict. Survivors would likely be found in regions like South America, parts of Africa, or Australia. The story unfolds 250 years post-war, focusing initially on a character named Lilith. One of the strengths of Butler's writing is her ability to gradually reveal the story, expanding it through vivid descriptions and dialogue. The O'Canali, though alien and peculiar, portrayed in a way that allows readers to understand and empathize with them. Butler skillfully navigates between humans, collie, and hybrids, constructing a compelling narrative world. Her approach to exploring what it means to be human and civilized is particularly noteworthy. The economy in these stories is intriguing, with trade involving items like genes, highlighting survival as a driving force. This aspect of the narrative underscores the complexities of identity and survival in a post-apocalyptic world. In the narrative, the characters attempt to interact with each other, but their efforts are often met with resistance or discomfort. For instance, Joseph expresses reluctance to engage in certain forms of contact, suggesting that the experience might be too intense or overwhelming. The humans in the story are portrayed as having a more rigid and direct approach compared to the Oankali, who are depicted as more subtle and manipulative in their interactions. The Oankali's methods are described as invasive, as they often make decisions on behalf of others without their full consent, under the guise of benefiting them. This paternalistic behavior is a central theme in the story, as it raises questions about autonomy and the ethics of making decisions for others. The Oankali's need to engage in trade with other species is also highlighted, suggesting that their survival and well-being are dependent on these interactions, even if they are not necessarily beneficial to the other species involved. The story explores the complexities of these relationships and the moral implications of the Oankali's actions, particularly in terms of their impact on the humanity of those they interact with. If I don't dedicate 3 hours a day to watching my favorite show, I start to feel depressed. It's a deep-seated desire for the content they provide, or else my dreams and aspirations might fade away. It's like a celebration of sorts. Without it, I wouldn't feel complete. But let's consider the light in this scenario. I mean, it's necessary, right? I'm not sure. I didn't get the impression that they adapted other people's genes just for the sake of it. It seems like they needed it to survive, and now they are almost indestructible. They call them constructs, you know. They were destructive, but now they have a different purpose. Beyond, they had certain characteristics that made them unique. Let's try to think about this. The kid, the son of vodka, for example. You know, they have one set of parents, then they have these other people involved. It's a complex web of relationships. This brings up another interesting point. We think of sexual reproduction in terms of male and female, right? Like in plants, where you have pollen, eggs, and seeds. But we don't really have anything where it takes 3 to make it work. We have relationships where people might have a 3-way or a ménage à trois, but that's not the same. Polyamory opens up the door to more complex relationships, where it could be 5, 7, or more people coming and going. But in this case, it's definitely 3, and it's not just about enjoyment, it's about the way reproduction has to happen. The reason is that in this race, the boy is the one who is manipulating the genes more than the others. So, you can understand why they would be needed. Ursula K. Le Guin had a story where there were 3 people involved, and I forget exactly how it worked in this race on a different planet with no sexual relations. We don't usually think of that, and so this wins up for a lot of the characters seeming kind of monstrous. I'm kind of interested in what your impressions were when you first read this. Did you think, wow, that's really gross, or, well, that's kind of interesting, or, wow, that would never work? At first, I thought it was neat that they could manipulate genes and make you stronger, healthier, and rid of disease. But I just found that very manipulative for some reason. I can't quite put my finger on it. I found the Akali to be something manipulative, greedy, or selfish, you know, like the Nazis. They thought they were doing good things for the human race, but they saw the human race as superior intelligence with this flaw of hierarchy and competition. By taking that out, they increased survival. The author highlights what they refer to as a contradiction in human behavior observed across species. Typically, as intelligent life forms evolve, their social structures tend to become less hierarchical. Humans, however, defy this pattern. Our intelligence grows alongside our propensity for rigid hierarchies. This paradox forms the foundation of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis series. Let me unpack this concept using her work as a framework. During the Reagan administration's early years, Cold War tensions fueled dangerous ideologies. Some policymakers genuinely believed nuclear warfare could be won, viewing it as a viable strategy to dismantle the Soviet Union. Reagan himself entertained this mindset, which disturbed the author deeply. This political climate directly inspired Butler's Xenogenesis narrative. She reasoned, if humanity could entertain such self-destructive logic, perhaps our evolutionary wiring contained fatal flaws. In the story, extraterrestrials arrive post-apocalypse and diagnose humanity with incompatible traits, exceptional intelligence paired with hierarchical instincts. Butler positions this analysis after a catastrophic event she calls the Big Work, a nod to humanity's self-sabotaging tendencies. Unlike elk clashing over mating rights, where conflicts resolve with minimal damage, humans amplify hierarchy-driven competition through advanced technology. A leader's ego or a nation's economic agenda, both rooted in hierarchical thinking, can now trigger wars obliterating entire populations. Nuclear weapons exemplify this deadly escalation, turning petty dominance games into existential threats. This framework challenges common sci-fi tropes. While most alien invasion stories cast humans as victims resisting domination, Butler flips the script. Humans become the galactic oddities, our love of hierarchy marking us as cosmic outliers. The aliens propose a solution, not genetic erasure of this trait, but conscious management. Through interbreeding and cultural evolution, we might temper our destructive impulses to join civilized interstellar society. The narrative also reflects 1970s-80s anxieties about genetic engineering. Public debates raged about test-tube babies, in vitro fertilization, and designer children, topics that evoked uncomfortable parallels with eugenics movements. Butler channels these fears into her Oankali aliens, who practice deliberate genetic exchange. Her work asks, can we ethically guide human evolution, or will we repeat historical mistakes under new technological guises? By blending Cold War politics with cutting-edge bioethics, Butler creates a timeless commentary on humanity's dual capacity for brilliance and self-destruction. Around this time, there was a lot of discussion and tension surrounding the emergence of in vitro children. The first such child in England was born in 1978, followed by the United States in 1981. At that point, only 15 in vitro children existed globally. Simultaneously, there was a noticeable rise in biracial relationships and the birth of biracial children, which began to challenge societal norms. This shift sparked significant concern about genetic mixing and the blending of human traits. The speaker reflects on how, in the context of human history, people were essentially confined to their own species. If someone's partner was, say, Japanese, there was no choice but to accept that genetic reality. This idea of tribalism, grouping people into rigid categories, becomes clearer when viewed through a modern lens. Back then, certain groups, like the Kali in the story, were seen as a distinct tribe, and their interactions with humans were framed as a conflict between us and them. The narrative explores how humans, in this fictional context, were denied the right to reproduce, decision tied to their eventual relocation to a new planet. This raises a critical question: how can a species overcome its self-destructive tendencies not through biology, but through cultural evolution? The story suggests that without such a shift, humanity might either destroy itself or become a threat to others by spreading its problems beyond Earth. The user also mentions a new book in the *Vampire Lestat* series, which introduces a fresh race of beings created by an alien species. This new race shares thematic parallels with Octavia Butler's *Xenogenesis* series, where humans grapple with their flaws and an alien species attempts to mediate their survival. While the connection between the two works isn't fully explained here, the similarities in exploring human fragility and the role of external forces are striking. The discussion then pivots to Thomas Hobbes, a philosopher known for his bleak view of life outside organized society as a nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes argued that this chaos stems from human nature itself, a concept that mirrors the contradiction the speaker references in the book. By linking Hobbes' ideas to the narrative, the text underscores how human self-destruction is not just a plot device but a philosophical inquiry into our capacity for change. The speaker emphasizes that no one in these stories is purely good or evil, challenging simplistic interpretations. Instead, the focus is on the complexity of survival, the cost of progress, and the ethical dilemmas of creating or altering life, whether through science, culture, or alien intervention. There are three fundamental motives for human conflict, as identified by Hobbes. The first is competition. If someone possesses something desirable, I might want it too, leading to potential conflict. The second motive is vanity, which involves the desire to be superior or higher in status than others, aligning with hierarchical structures. The third, and perhaps most perilous, is what Hobbes termed diffidence in his 17th century English. This refers to strategic thinking, anticipating that if someone desires what I have, I must act first to prevent them from taking it. This mindset can lead to a cycle of preemptive actions. When these three motives, competition, vanity, and diffidence, operate simultaneously, they create a volatile environment. Hobbes theorized that in such a state of nature, life would be chaotic and dangerous, necessitating a strong civil society with authoritative governance to maintain order. This often results in a totalitarian state, which, while not ideal, is seen as necessary to prevent constant conflict. This concept aligns well with themes in the novel The Rise, where characters are placed in a state of nature scenario, such as being stranded in the Amazon. They must build shelters and find food, which forces them to focus on survival rather than conflict. This environment encourages cooperation over competition, as survival becomes a shared goal. The idea is that by creating breathing space, individuals are less likely to engage in harmful behaviors. The novel also explores what it means to be human. Is it defined by having human DNA, even if reproduction is not possible, or is it something more? The resistors in the story believe that only purebred humans, unmodified by external influences, should have a say in defining humanity. This raises questions about identity and the criteria for being considered human. It's important to understand that Lilith and her offspring have a very different perspective on their existence. The hybrids or constructs they create are born into a reality where they don't fully belong to either the human world or the realm of Kali. This creates a challenging situation for them, as they must navigate their identities and decide what they will ultimately become. This predicament can be quite distressing. As they undergo their transformations, they initially appear human, but as the changes progress, they may end up resembling something more grotesque, like a creature with multiple arms. For instance, there is one individual whose transformation went horribly wrong, leading to a form that is almost mollusk-like. This unfortunate being was deprived of the necessary stimuli to facilitate her metamorphosis, which left her in a state of despair, wishing for non-existence. Although she returned to some form of life, it was never complete or fulfilling. Now, let's consider the implications of being human in this context. If we were to find ourselves in such a world, how would we respond? Would we align ourselves with the resistors, who oppose the constructs, or would we choose to collaborate with them? Personally, I think I might lean towards collaboration. The resistors seem to live in a constant state of desperation, filled with aggression and resentment. In contrast, those who collaborate might experience a more peaceful existence, where even if one falls ill, there are means to recover, which is a significant advantage. This situation is particularly evident in the first generation of constructs. One character, who was never entirely comfortable with her role, ultimately made the choice to embrace this new way of life for the sake of humanity. However, as time passed, later generations adapted to this lifestyle, accepting it as their norm. This brings to mind historical parallels where certain groups were deemed subhuman, often based on cultural or religious differences rather than any inherent lack of humanity. These groups were often labeled as the other, which allowed those in power to justify their actions against them. The idea of being chosen or saved created a divide, leading to a self-protective instinct to keep the chaos of the outside world at bay. This mindset often resulted in the belief that those who were not like us needed to change before they could be considered human, reinforcing the notion that native peoples were subhuman. This dehumanization made it easier to justify their destruction, as they were seen as outside the bounds of what it meant to be civilized or saved. If we look back at history, we can see that similar themes have emerged during religious conflicts. These conflicts often revolved around concepts of being saved or chosen, as well as the complexities surrounding interracial relationships and the children born from these unions. At the time the author was writing, society was still grappling with issues related to miscegenation laws, particularly in the southern United States. This was around the time of the landmark Loving v. Virginia Supreme Court decision, which took place in the late 1960s, but the societal implications of such laws lingered into the late 1970s and early 1980s. During this period, there was still significant debate over the legitimacy and acceptance of interracial relationships, especially those involving black individuals. Interestingly, despite the historical context of slavery, where interracial relationships did occur, the narrative the author presents is more complex. In her story, she doesn't merely depict characters of various races interacting, she also explores the idea of intermingling with extraterrestrial beings. Some critics have pointed out that she not only addresses interracial themes but also ventures into territory that some might label as bestiality. However, I believe this term is misapplied, as it typically refers to interactions with lower species rather than intelligent beings. The author is boldly challenging societal norms, going beyond the typical portrayals found in shows like Star Trek, where characters might share a kiss across species lines, which some viewers might find controversial. In Star Trek, for instance, Captain Kirk famously had romantic encounters with green-skinned aliens, which was groundbreaking for its time. On a personal note, I find it amusing that my own background is entirely European, yet I have a Jewish surname that isn't actually my family's original name. This name change was made by my grandfather, who, due to the anti-Semitic attitudes prevalent in the early 20th century, chose a name that sounded more English to help him succeed in business. He was originally Serbian and faced significant prejudice against Slavs during that era. It's ironic that those who make assumptions about my heritage based on my surname might discover through genetic testing that their own backgrounds are far more diverse than they realize. They often claim to identify my Jewish heritage simply by looking at me, which is quite amusing considering the complexities of ancestry and identity. I have some Scandinavian heritage mixed with other ancestry. It's quite literally right there in my genetic makeup. You can't really categorize it in conventional terms. If you're referring to Slavic connections, that was actually a close-knit group, but they were my adoptive family, not biological relatives. My adoptive father had Serbian and Polish roots. It's worth noting that genetic testing databases are continuously evolving as more information is collected, becoming increasingly precise with time. Currently, certain regions remain underrepresented in these databases. For instance, my maternal lineage traces back to Sicily, but that particular database isn't comprehensive enough yet to provide truly accurate results. Sicilians themselves represent a fascinating genetic blend. The Norse people actually conquered and settled in Sicily for a period, contributing to the island's diverse genetic landscape. Circling back to our discussion about genetic traits, what's particularly interesting about our fascination with genetic markers? The characteristics we tend to fixate on regarding race are relatively insignificant in the grand scheme, features like nose shape or skin pigmentation, which does serve some practical purpose in terms of sun protection. However, if we compared ourselves to truly alien species, or even just to other earthbound creatures that differ significantly from humans, rather than focusing on what might be described as hierarchical differences between human groups, we'd likely find it much easier to coexist harmoniously. What we don't fully appreciate is how we conceptualize humanity itself. We establish collective terminology to define what constitutes being human, and anything beyond those parameters is classified as other. But these definitions are entirely constructed, they are simply what we've agreed upon. As long as someone isn't considered part of your tribe, they can be categorized differently. There seems to be a functional necessity for creating an other, because it strengthens group identity and cohesion. But looking at humanity in its purest sense, what characteristics would make someone undeniably human by our standards? Consider how people are now experimenting with do-it-yourself genetic modifications. While current attempts might be rudimentary, this practice will inevitably become more sophisticated and widespread. If I enhance my genetic makeup by removing cancer susceptibility genes, does that make me less human, or is that modification still within acceptable parameters? As we continue to evolve and adapt, these boundaries will shift. What if I decide to modify my eyes to perceive colors beyond the typical human visual spectrum? We maintain certain criteria to define humanity, essentially a checklist of attributes that may or may not adjust as we evolve. Looking back through our evolutionary history, was Australopithecus human? Not quite, because we've determined they hadn't yet developed certain traits we've decided are essential to humanity. The size of the cranium is not the only factor that determines human intelligence. We have a list of characteristics that we associate with being human, such as emotions, intelligence, and empathy. However, there are always exceptions to these rules. For instance, some individuals may lack empathy, but that does not make them any less human. It's essential to understand that these are just characteristics that we have defined as human, and they may change as we continue to define what it means to be human. For example, some cultures have words that distinguish themselves as human beings and others as barbarians or foreigners. This ethnocentric view can lead to discrimination and anti-immigration sentiments. Some people may use rhetoric that implies immigrants are not human, which is not only incorrect but also harmful. It's important to remember that immigrants are people too, and they contribute significantly to various professions, such as computer science and healthcare. The issue of discrimination and anti-immigration sentiments is complex and has been present throughout history. During the civil rights era, for example, some people in the South were preached from the pulpit that certain groups were not human or were less than human. This subjective and harmful view was used to justify slavery and other forms of discrimination. It's crucial to recognize that humanity is not determined by society but is an objective fact. Everyone, regardless of their background or characteristics, is human and deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. The discussion revolves around the deeply ingrained human tendency to categorize and discriminate against others, particularly along racial lines. It raises the question of whether such behavior is inherently irrational, yet persists as a cultural constant across societies. For instance, historically, some groups have justified their superiority over others, such as the way certain communities viewed themselves as better than black individuals. This mindset, though scientifically unfounded, has been used to maintain hierarchical structures, often to the detriment of those perpetuating it. Consider the case of poor white Southerners who, despite facing exploitation from those in power, clung to the illusion of racial superiority as a form of psychological benefit. This example highlights how discrimination can serve no functional purpose yet remain stubbornly entrenched in human behavior. The conversation further explores whether humanity's higher intelligence should enable us to recognize and overcome these irrational biases. However, the hierarchical nature of societies often allows individuals to exploit these divisions for personal gain. This raises a thought-provoking question: would it take an external force, such as an advanced alien race, to intervene and correct these deeply rooted issues, or can humanity evolve on its own? While it's clear that certain forms of discrimination, such as punishing criminal behavior, are justified, racial discrimination is increasingly recognized as outdated and harmful. Yet, it persists because some individuals still derive perceived benefits from it or draw misguided conclusions from their experiences. The idea of an external, more rational entity stepping in to address humanity's shortcomings is presented as a hypothetical solution. This scenario underscores the challenge of overcoming ingrained biases and the potential need for a radical shift in perspective to achieve true progress. Ultimately, the question remains: can humanity rise above its hierarchical tendencies and irrational prejudices, or will it require an outside force to guide it toward a more equitable future? It's fascinating to consider how adversaries can, over time, become more unified in their opposition. In the United States, for instance, racial divisions have gradually lessened, partly due to shared experiences and challenges. Consider the influx of immigrants who, despite facing initial resistance, have integrated into the broader society. This integration often occurs when groups face a common adversary, creating a unifying force that can be more tangible and easier to rally around than abstract concepts. Imagine if, instead of focusing on conflicts with one another, we directed our collective efforts towards a monumental project, such as cleaning up the oceans or addressing the decline of bee populations. These environmental challenges could serve as a unifying force, compelling us to set aside tribal differences for the sake of survival. The pressure of environmental issues is likely to become a significant catalyst for change, pushing us towards collaboration. Historically, humanity has often only made significant shifts when faced with existential threats. Many science fiction narratives explore this theme, where humanity only unites and evolves after nearly destroying itself. For example, Frank Herbert's works depict a post-apocalyptic world where humanity rises from the ashes of a devastating war. Similarly, in Star Trek, humanity begins to flourish after a nuclear war, with the arrival of the Vulcans marking a new era of cooperation and progress. This recurring theme in speculative fiction suggests that humans are resistant to change until they are on the brink of catastrophe. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes, it takes a near-catastrophic event to catalyze meaningful transformation. By focusing on shared goals and challenges, we might find a way to unite and build a sustainable future for generations to come. People often reach a point where they decide to make significant changes in their lives, such as altering their diet or adopting new habits. However, this transformation usually requires a catalyst, especially for those who have deeply ingrained beliefs or behaviors. A notable example of this is the aftermath of the September 11th attacks, which momentarily united the nation in a shared sense of purpose and solidarity. The shock of that tragic event brought people together, albeit briefly, as they rallied around a common cause. Yet, there was also an undercurrent of anger and a desire for retribution, which complicated the unity that emerged. This illustrates how a profound event can prompt collective action, even if the motivation is mixed. Returning to the topic of societal fears, there is often a prevailing sense of dread that can feel reminiscent of science fiction narratives. Speaking of science fiction, it's interesting to consider when this term first gained traction. The genre began to take shape in the early 20th century, particularly after the development of nuclear weapons. The potential for humanity to annihilate itself with such technology sparked imaginations and fears alike. I recall reading about a pulp fiction writer from that era who, through sheer coincidence, speculated accurately about aspects of the Manhattan Project. His insights were so close to the truth that military officials advised him to cease his writing. While I can't recall his name, it's a fascinating example of how fiction can sometimes intersect with reality. Even in the 1920s and 1930s, writers were already contemplating the existence of weapons capable of obliterating entire planets. H.P. Lovecraft, for instance, created horror stories featuring monstrous entities that posed existential threats to humanity. Additionally, ancient religious texts often depicted beings from other realms, such as angels or prophets, which reflects humanity's long-standing fascination with the unknown. Throughout history, particularly around the year 1000, there was widespread anxiety about impending doom. People believed that the new millennium would bring catastrophic events, although in reality, the transition to the year 1000 occurred in 1016 due to calendar discrepancies. This fear was echoed in the Millerite movement of the 1840s, where followers repeatedly revised their predictions about the end of the world. Ultimately, these narratives, whether they involve powerful beings or apocalyptic scenarios, are deeply rooted in Judeo-Christian mythology and reflect humanity's enduring concerns about destruction and salvation. The concept of angels and otherworldly beings has always fascinated humans, and it's interesting to explore the idea that there's a separate realm of existence, often referred to as heaven or hell. This notion suggests that there's a different way of existing in the universe, and our actions can either earn us a place in this realm or not. However, it's essential to consider that this idea might be influenced by our socio-economic comfort levels. When our basic needs are met, we tend to adopt a lifestyle that prioritizes short-term gains over long-term consequences. This is evident in the way some people approach problems, often waiting until the situation becomes catastrophic before taking action. On the other hand, there are individuals who are more proactive and aware of the potential consequences of their actions. For instance, in a village where resources are scarce, there are often a few individuals who recognize the importance of conservation and planning for the future. They might warn others about the dangers of depleting their resources, but their concerns are often dismissed until it's too late. This highlights the human characteristic of self-preservation, which can sometimes be at odds with our tendency towards self-destruction. It's interesting to note that when humans feel safe and secure, we tend to become complacent and neglect our long-term well-being. This is evident in the way we approach our health and wellness. For example, some people might overeat or engage in unhealthy habits, despite knowing the risks. This behavior is reminiscent of our lab mix, who will eat excessively if given the opportunity. This trait is not unique to dogs, as humans also have a tendency to overindulge in things that are harmful to us. The struggle between self-preservation and self-destruction is a complex one, and it's often influenced by our brain's chemistry. Addiction is a prime example of this, where our brain can convince us that we need a particular substance or behavior to survive, even if it's harming us. This is evident in the way some people continue to smoke despite being diagnosed with serious health conditions. The brain's ability to prioritize short-term pleasure over long-term consequences is a powerful force, and it's something that we need to be aware of when making decisions about our health and well-being. In conclusion, the human condition is complex and multifaceted, and our tendencies towards self-preservation and self-destruction are deeply ingrained. By recognizing these tendencies and being more mindful of our actions, we can work towards creating a better future for ourselves and those around us. Understanding addictive behavior is crucial, as addictive substances or activities can directly stimulate the brain's pleasure centers, leading to complex issues. This concept is explored in Larry Niven's Ringworld, where the main character encounters a device that connects directly to these pleasure centers. This connection is highly debilitating because once initiated, the individual is unlikely to stop using it. The character, who I can't recall the exact term for, experiences an overwhelming desire for this stimulation, which becomes a lifelong pursuit. In the story, an alien interacts with a 200-year-old woman found in a spaceship, making her addicted to this sensation. The main character, who is the president, finds this situation intriguing. The female lead, who is a counterpart, leaves shortly after. It's been a while since I last read it, so I'm not entirely sure if this was the plot we discussed for next year. As we wrap up this year, we're excited about the new tracks coming up next year. Thank you for all your participation and engaging discussions.